Fifth Gospel Podcast with your host, Matthew and Ritah Murphy.
Welcome to episode 2 of the Fifth Gospel Podcast. Today we're exploring a concept known as divine agency, and that is the way the scriptures understand God's work and presence in the world. Slight warning, this episode may get a little theoretical, but this idea is important because it's one of the foundations for everything we discuss throughout the Fifth Gospel. Rather than assuming human interpretations are infallible, the Fifth Gospel recognizes that every culture and every generation or era wrestles with understanding the reality it inhabits. Throughout history, people have sought to make sense of the powers beyond themselves, and that search has produced some profound insights, some very compelling ideologies, but the search has also been shaped by the limits of human perspective. For example, after the invention of the microscope, many diseases that had long been attributed to divine punishment, bad air, or other unseen mystical forces were found to have more natural causes, such as bacteria or other microorganisms. Before such inventions, both the causes of disease and the thinking around them were incomplete. The discoveries once made changed the entire outlook of societies, cultures, and the world. Now, we'll come back to this theme in future episodes. Ritah?
Oh, welcome, people. Before we can understand Jesus, you're saying we first have to understand the world he entered. Let's start by talking about ancient Israel and how they understood God's presence amongst them.
Great. It's important to understand that Jesus didn't enter humanity out of nowhere. He entered a world already shaped by centuries of Jewish history, theology, and expectation. The ideas of covenant, Messiah, temple, sacrifice, and God's presence were already firmly established. So to understand Jesus, we need to first understand the framework he inherited. And I believe this matters because it gives us insight into how God often works within the structures people already know. Understanding that pattern can also help us recognize how God's activity may be working through the structures of our own world today. What Jesus revealed through the Tanakh was its deeper purpose, centering its laws, stories, and prophetic hopes on agape, self-giving love. Studying ancient Israel also helps us avoid reading history through the lens of Jewish exceptionalism. Instead, we can appreciate Israel's unique role in providing the foundation for the greatest demonstration of self-giving purpose and the clearest revelation of the path that leads to eternal life.
So, who is the angel of the Lord and why is this figure so important?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? According to the biblical narrative, ancient Israel understood the angel of the Lord as the visible manifestation of Yahweh. The angel of the Lord is always the narrator's description. It's never a title the figure claims for itself. The figure never, for instance, introduces itself as the messenger of the Lord. Rather, this is the language the biblical authors use to describe the encounter. And this narrative ambiguity preserves the idea that God remains beyond creation while also making himself present within it. So God is both transcendent and yet here among us. We see this pattern throughout the Hebrew scriptures in books such as Exodus, Judges, and Zechariah. The angel of the Lord is not portrayed as simply another angelic being. The figure speaks as Yahweh, receives honor due to Yahweh, and yet is described by the narrator as Yahweh's messenger. Again, this is another area we'll explore fully in the book. It's much of ancient Jewish thought. There seems to be little interest in analyzing this narrative ambiguity any further. If the text was considered sacred in Jewish culture, or if the messenger was understood as God's instrument, people often accepted the ambiguity about God's nature. Their focus was not on explaining the paradox of the Lord being both Yahweh and Yahweh's messenger, but on understanding God's instructions to Israel. It was less about defining precisely who God is and more about understanding what God had said. So whether the angel of the Lord presented a contradiction in the nature of God does not appear to be a primary concern of many ancient Jewish interpreters.
So, does that mean that Jesus is the actual angel of Yahweh?
Well, figures such as the messenger of Yahweh, Melchizedek, the Son of Man, wisdom, which is often personified in the Proverbs, all previously functioned in a similar narrative space that Jesus would occupy. It's especially evident in the Gospels when Jesus is described as the Son of Man and the Word. The New Testament writers use a convergence of biblical images and titles to present Jesus. The Messiah, as we mentioned, the Son of Man, the Son of God, and the exalted Lord, or in the Greek, Kyrios, which is used in multiple letters by the Apostle Paul, are all examples of this. The angel of the Lord is not explicitly used to identify Jesus in the New Testament, but the portrayal of the angel of the Lord fits within this same theological space, God's unique representative, worthy of the same worship and honor as Yahweh himself.
Does the Bible consider Jesus as Yahweh?
Well, some passages in John's gospel text strongly support that, but consistently, the New Testament presents the Father as Yahweh, while portraying Jesus as the pre-existent Son and divine agent whom the Father exalts as Lord and Messiah. You know, I also want to clear up, and we'll discuss in more detail in a later podcast, but the oneness that the Gospel of John text expresses with regards to the Father and Son's relationship refers to a unity of will and not a unity of person. The relationship between the Father and the Son carries a familiar ambiguity, much like that between Yahweh and the angel of the Lord. Like the angel of the Lord, the Son receives worship, divine honor, and authority, and yet is also described as the one who is sent by a higher authority, the Father. The biblical record does not fully resolve the precise nature of the Father-Son relationship, as we mentioned earlier, leaving many of its details open to interpretation and giving rise to later Christological debates. For now, our aim is simply to describe and report on what the biblical texts present. Now, we'll examine the Father-Son relationship in greater depth and with more precision in later podcasts.
So, you have mentioned quite a bit today. What should people take away from today's discussion?
Sure. Yeah. Well, if there's one thing I'd leave our listeners with is this. Before we decide what the New Testament is saying about Jesus, again, we should first try to understand the world and the language that shaped its authors, the people that wrote about Jesus, that wrote about his stories and teachings. The Bible grew out of centuries of Jewish thought about how a transcendent God makes himself known within creation. Divine agency was one of the ways ancient Israel understood God's presence and activity on earth. By the first century, Jesus' followers drew on that same biblical framework while presenting him in a uniquely exalted and messianic role. Throughout this podcast, we'll explore how these interpretations developed over time, compare different perspectives, and later explain where our own conclusions fit within that broader conversation.
Next time, we'll begin to explore how the Bible describes the Spirit of God and how it moves human interpretation.
Absolutely. Thanks for spending this time with us. If today's conversation gave you something to think about, we'd appreciate it if you'd like, share, and subscribe. God bless, and we'll connect again next time.